I'm your host, Karen Soutar, and I'm here to talk some Blue Jays baseball with you this evening. Sunny Side of the Dome is brought to you by Jays from the Couch. We stream live Thursdays at 7 p.m. on Jays from the Couch's YouTube channel, so you can always tune in live. And if you miss the live show, no problem. You can always play it back through YouTube. You can also follow. We post links on our Facebook and Twitter pages. And if you like the content here at Sunny Side of the Dome, there's lots more where that came from. There's Jays from the Couch's main podcast, which airs Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. As well, there's another show, the Unfeck Circle, which is Tuesdays at 7 p.m. That's hosted by the Feckless Wonder, my Jays from the Couch colleague, Steve Feck. And if you haven't been tuning in for that, you definitely should. He's very worthwhile. He'll make you think. He's fun. He's entertaining. You might or might not agree with his takes, but he's definitely worth a listen to. So, good evening, everybody. How's it going? I know I'm happy. I know I'm happy that spring training is in full force. If you follow social media, if you follow the Jays, I'm sure you've seen lots of pictures, videos, Zoom interviews, comments here and there about what's going on down in camp. One exciting thing after years in the making, that today the Blue Jays unveiled their player development complex, virtually, of course, because of the pandemic, but they showed it off by video, and it looks very impressive. So the hope is that it will not only help with the players that they have in-house, but knowing that they have this on hand might actually help them attract free agents in the future. Well, let's hope that it does. Fingers crossed. I mean, it's certainly a good thing to have. So one thing, if you haven't seen the video or pictures of it, they have a particular room just like there is at the Rogers Center, where you've got the banners, the two championship years, the years that they won divisions, went to the playoffs like they did in 2016, and then immediately to the right of all of those ribbons are 3 blank ribbons. I love it. Sends a message. Guys, we have expectations. We're going to add to these in the near future. So gotta love to see that. Okay, well, before I get to the heart of today's lineup, so we've been talking on and off about the pitching situation, the rotation, spent a couple of episodes talking mostly about that, spoke about the infield mainly last week, but as we all know, there's been at least the hope that the Jays might add an experienced starting pitcher to go behind Hyun-Jin Ryu and all these other, I call them prospects and projects, even though a lot of the young guys are no longer officially prospects. But anyway, the hope has been there. There's been some free agents, and one by one they're coming off the board. Well, in the last week, another one came off the board, and for me personally, it was very unfortunate. Taiwan Walker, as I and many other Jays fans were hoping that he might re-sign with the Jays. He did so well in his brief tenure as a Toronto Blue Jay. Well, he's found himself a new home. He's got a multi-year deal with the New York Mets. So what can I say? Best of luck, Taiwan. And yeah, you'll always have the place in the hearts of me and I think a number of other Toronto Blue Jays fans. So unfortunate for our team, but c'est la vie. That's what happened. Anyway, on to the heart of tonight's order. So I spent last week, I spent the majority of the time talking about the Blue Jays infield. So I thought it would make sense to move out to the outfield and have a look at the outlook out there. So, excuse me a second. So last year, for the majority of the season, that they had 3 everyday outfielders. They had Randall Grichuk playing center field, Teoscar Hernandez playing right field, and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. playing left field. And for a large part of that, they actually look pretty good out there, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Then, as everybody knows, in the offseason with free agency, the Blue Jays went out and quote unquote caught one of the biggest fishes available in free agency, and that is superstar outfielder George Springer. So now what have they got? Basically, they've got 4 everyday outfielders for 3 positions. So what's that going to look like? What are they going to do? So let's take a look at that. So looking at each one, let's start with an overview of who they've got and so forth. So Teoscar Hernandez, the Blue Jays got him in a trade at the deadline in 2017 with the Houston Astros. The Jays, they were really nowhere near contending, unfortunately. And the Houston Astros were on their way to postseason and, as it turned out, a championship. And they had a need for another left-handed pitcher who they used in relief, and that's Francisco Lariano, who's back in the Jays organization now. He signed a minor league contract, so we'll see if he makes the team. But anyway, so they got a pretty decent-looking prospect in outfielder Teoscar Hernandez. He's had a bit of an up and down career with the Jays so far. He's played the outfield. He's played all 3 outfield positions. Unfortunately, his defense has been it's been a work in progress, and actually, I think last year it was a little bit better than it had been the previous 1 or 2 years. But just talking about Teoscar, the hitter. So through 2019, started off the season, got off to a slow start, and through May the 16th of 2019, his OPS was 564. He really wasn't doing himself any favors with his play. So the Jays decided to send him down to AAA Buffalo. He actually wasn't down there all that long. He was only there for about a few weeks. And then when he was recalled fairly early in June, from then until the rest of until the end of the season in 2019, he looked like a different hitter. From that point through the end of the season, his OPS was over 300 points higher than it had been when he was demoted. It was 873. And if you just look at his OPS after the All-Star break, it was even better. It was 939. So for me, I felt that we had gotten a taste and a look of the real Hernandez in terms of the talent that he possesses as a hitter. Now, some people were still unconvinced. Was this the real thing, or was this just a hot streak? I thought that he had been consistently good at that point too long for it to be just a hot streak, but that was my opinion. So fast forward to the 2020 season, and if anything, he looked even better at the plate in 2020 than he had in 2019. He was consistently very, very good. He was honestly, he was the best Blue Jays hitter in 2020 consistently. And through from the beginning of the 60-game season through early September, when he unfortunately got injured, he had an OPS of 995. Had he maintained that for the entire season, that would have been second in the American League, only to DJ LeMahieu of the New York Yankees. But unfortunately, as I said, he got injured, missed some time on the injured list, and then he came back and his overall numbers dropped. He still finished the season with a 919 OPS, which is still very good. And it was still good for 7th best in the American League. My theory, and I don't have that proof or the inside information to back this up, but my theory is that the Jays found themselves fighting for a postseason spot, and I think Hernandez and maybe a couple of other players as well tried to rush themselves back from injury because they wanted to help the team, and in doing so, they may not have been fully healthy, and their personal numbers may have suffered as a result. That's just my opinion. Steve, US of Jays, would you prefer to have Hernandez get the majority of his at-bats as the DH and improve defense by playing Grichuk in right field? Well, thanks for the question, Steve. It's a valid question. It's actually a point that I was going to make. Given the fact that they still have all four of these everyday outfielders, that is one way that they could improve the team overall because, you need your offense. The Jays had no problem scoring runs in 2020, and if anything, with the additions that they've made with George Springer and, Marcus Semien, the jury's out on which Marcus Semien we'll see with a bat anyway. But I'm not expecting them to have any problem scoring runs in 2021. One way that they need to improve, that they know they needed to improve over 2020 is their defense. And yeah, that's one way that they could go, and it might help them win some games. So let's put a bookmark in that. Thank you very much for the question. I will come back to that. Excuse me just a moment. Okay, yeah, so that's Teoscar Hernandez, and actually Randall Grichuk is the next one that I was going to talk about. So Randall Grichuk also came to the Jays in a trade. It was an off-season trade in between 2017 prior to the 2018 season. The Jays acquired him from the St. Louis Cardinals. And here was a guy, I read up on him a bit. I didn't really know that much about him. He had been he'd had some inconsistencies, had a little trouble getting on base. He definitely had the ability to hit for power, and he was also a pretty good defender in the outfield. Okay, well, let's get a look at this guy. So 2018, his first season in a Blue Jays uniform, and he came over, and initially his hitting, it wasn't good at all. It's just like through the first part of the season, I think through the first month or so, his OPS was 435, I think, yeah. Now I remember that he had a bit of an injury and had missed some time back in spring training of 2018. So again, my theory was maybe when he came back, he wanted to make a good impression on his new team, his new teammates, management, and all that. Maybe he wasn't fully healthy. He was also adjusting, I'm sure, because they're not robots, they're humans. So he was adjusting to a new team, a new league, coming over from the National League. Maybe he was facing pitchers that he'd never seen before, and there were some things going on. So anyway, he was on what they called the disabled list back then, and now we call it the injured list. And then once he came back from June 1st through the end of the season, once again, he looked like a completely different hitter with an 872 OPS for that part of the season, and his overall numbers were much better as a result. But when I saw that, I got excited, thinking, this could really be a piece to the puzzle as far as trying to build a future champion. So early in 2019, once the season had started, but hadn't been going on for all that long, the Jays jumped on the contract extension bandwagon. That there were a lot of teams and players that had come to terms on contract extensions, and the Jays joined the party with Randall Grichuk and gave him a 5-year, $52 million contract. And at the time, I was all for it because his 2018 numbers and having some decent defense in the outfield, I thought he could be really useful in that way. Well, unfortunately, since then, his production has really not been what fans probably hoped for and what management was probably expecting when they gave out that much money. 2019, his OPS on the season 738, excuse me. 2019 it was better, it was 793. Now in 2020, yes, 793 in 2020. He actually started off the season quite well in 2020, and then it his overall numbers kind of slid, and I guess you don't really know, and none of us will ever really know with a 60-game season. It was what someone's overall numbers would have been had they actually played a regular season of 162 games. So it's hard to say. Unfortunately, he was kind of sliding the wrong way. The other thing is his defensive numbers took a little bit of a hit. And he'd previously been a good defender, and then to see that kind of fall off, and I know there are people who think that he might rebound and become the better defender that he used to be. I've got my doubts about that. I believe he's 30 years old now, and 30 isn't old for a regular non-athlete person. For an athlete, for an MLB player, it's getting a little bit up there. It's at least middle-aged, and he missed a little bit of time last year. You heard talk about him having a stiff back. Unfortunately, I know from experience, and I'm sure lots of people do, that once you have a bad back, it never completely goes away. And I'm just afraid that I'm afraid he might already have peaked, Randall Grichuk, and so we've got him for another 3 years with that contract. And anyway, okay, so moving on. The final piece of the outfield from last season, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. So the Blue Jays signed him as a free agent. He came from Cuba. They signed him after the 2016 season as someone who had never played professionally in North America, and they gave him a 7-year contract. So for someone, I don't know his financial situation prior to the contract. It's none of my business, but for someone who might not have had tons and tons of money, he got a pretty decent deal, because there was no way to really know how he was going to do in professional North American baseball. And they had to wait it out the first year of that contract, 2017. He didn't even see Major League Baseball. Came up partway through 2018. His numbers, not terrible for a rookie. He had a 755 OPS. One exciting thing, he did have a streak of multi-hit games. So that was a lot of fun to watch, and he seemed to have some real potential. 2019, because here's a player that had played a few different positions: shortstop, second base, some left field, and maybe they weren't quite sure where they were going to play him. So to start 2019, Bo Bichette was still in the minors, but they had Freddie Galvis as the everyday shortstop. So they had Gurriel playing second base. And unfortunately, his defense there really wasn't that great. He made a number of errors, and I don't know if that situation kind of weighed on his mind a little bit, but the hitting also suffered. He had a 375 OPS, and the Jays ended up sending him down to AAA Buffalo. It was a bit of an unfortunate situation because they had a bobblehead giveaway, a Lourdes Gurriel Jr. bobblehead giveaway at the Rogers Center in the middle of April, and they gave away all those bobbleheads, and Gurriel Jr. himself was playing in Buffalo at the time. So anyway, yeah, he was down there for about 5 weeks, and they had him playing left field rather than the infield. Once they finally called him back up on May 24th, he played exclusively left field, and once again, he looked like a very different player that he had from that day through the end of the season. He posted a 919 OPS. So this was more the player that I think the Blue Jays envisioned that they were getting when they signed him to that deal, and it was finally starting to pay off. Excuse me. Okay, so that's Gurriel. And then last year, again, he played the whole season. He managed to avoid injuries, which was a good thing, because prior to that, he pretty much, that was one thing that he battled, was missing some time with injuries. And so, yeah, he stayed healthy. He stayed on the field. He had an 882, a very good OPS for the entire season in 2020. Would have won a Silver Slugger for American League left fielders were it not for a young gentleman with the Chicago White Sox named Eloy Jimenez. So he was 9 points higher. So good for him. As well, Gurriel Jr. also finished in the top 3 in Gold Glove voting. So he had quite a remarkable season, and he's under team control for another 4 years. So that's really great for the Jays. Then, as I said, so it's on one hand, last year it may have looked like the outfield was set. Then they went out, the Jays did, and they signed George Springer, 7-year veteran, 3-year All-Star, or three-time All-Star, lifetime OPS of 852. And actually, if you look at the way his career has progressed, the numbers earlier in his career brought that OPS down a little bit. Last year, it was 899. So, yeah, he made the top 25 in the American League, as did Hernandez, as did Gurriel Jr. So, yeah, there's a lot of talent on that team. So, circling back, you've got 4 everyday outfielders. You only have 3 outfield positions. What do you do with them all? There was talk, there was speculation that maybe one of them would end up getting traded. When there was talk about possibly trading for upgrades, like the rumors about Francisco Lindor before he ended up with the Mets or pitching or whatever. Gurriel Jr.'s name came up so many times, and all I can say myself as a fan is, having watched him play and seen what he has accomplished in a Blue Jays uniform and what I think he still can accomplish, I'm really glad they didn't trade him. I really think that he's a significant piece that can help them win now and in the future. And my Blue Jay colored glasses, which are coming, I think they've got another championship coming. Maybe not necessarily this season, but soon. And I think he's going to be a part of it. The other possibility is that maybe they could end up trading Randall Grichuk. They obviously they didn't do it yet. That's something that maybe they could do down the road. And then some people say, well, how do you trade someone who is making all that money and hasn't been as productive as maybe they had hoped? Well, teams do it all the time. They trade players with large salaries who have underperformed relative to the expectations of that contract, and all they need to do is to add some cash. So if he is making roughly $10 million a season for the next 3 seasons, they kick in whatever, 60, 70% of that. I don't know. I'm not a general manager, obviously, but teams do it. The Jays did it most recently when they traded away Russell Martin. They signed him to a 5-year contract, and for the 5th year of that contract, he was in an LA Dodger uniform, and the Jays were paying most of his salary. But anyway, so it can be done, assuming that they do hang on to everybody. I mean, they could rotate, they could give guys days off. here and there, as Steve suggested, and I was also going to possibly mention that's another way that they could handle it because, again, unfortunately, Hernandez, as much as he's got the physical talent, he's got the speed. He's near the tops of Statcast as far as the Blue Jays and raw speed. I don't know what it is, but he's just never really been able to put it together and become a very good defensive outfielder. So that's a possibility. They could improve the team play overall by having Grichuk play some outfield and maybe using Teoscar Hernandez as a designated hitter. So that's a possibility. You've got Guerrero Jr., who they've said is probably going to spend a majority of his time at first base, and then there's Rowdy Tellez, who was red hot for a couple of weeks last season before he got injured. So it'll depend. You've got three guys who could be DHing some of the time and only one DH spots, as well as your first base. And so it's getting a little crowded, but I'm sure they'll sort it out. The other interesting thing, and this came down last week, was where they're having different guys take reps, at least during spring training, and it surprised the heck out of me that they're using Gurriel Jr. not exclusively as a left fielder, but they're also having him take some reps at third base and at first base. So I guess I can sort of think along with management in that you've got 4 outfielders for 3 outfield spots, and you've kind of got a hole at third base. Right now they say Kevin Biggio is going to spend a lot of his time there, and maybe that'll work out, and maybe he'll be really good there. He hasn't played a lot of the positions, so maybe he could turn out to be really good. Maybe they envision a possibility of Gurriel spending some of his time as a third baseman. He's played infield before. He certainly has a strong arm. That's not a problem. So have a look at him. Do you see any of the prospects getting major league time in 2021? Excuse me, that's a really good question. Thank you. I think, you've got to look at a couple of things. You've got to look at how well they do and the organizational needs. So you've got a couple of guys, when we're talking about third base, you've got a couple of players, prospects, Austin Martin, maybe Jordan Groshans. Either of them might end up playing some third base for the Blue Jays in the future. So, see how they do in spring training. And if they have to spend some time in the minor leagues, do they absolutely tear it up in the minor leagues? And in the meantime, are the Jays just not really finding the answer there? It's kind of like what happened with Alejandro Kirk in 2020. Here was this guy that basically looked like he could fall out of bed and get a base hit. And in the meantime, the Jays were getting hardly any production out of their catchers. Reese McGuire, just had such a forgettable season. Danny Jansen, he was the everyday catcher, and his hitting didn't really get going until late in the season. But yeah, they tried, I think, Caleb Joseph for a few games, and it was just sort of the timing was right, that they had a need, and here was this guy that looked like he had some really good upside, so they gave him a shot, and it really worked out. So who knows? There's also the possibility. One name I've heard a bit is Simeon Woods Richardson, pitcher, one of the pitchers that the Jays got back in the Marcus Stroman trade. And there are a lot of people, including Mr. Woods Richardson himself, who believe that he could be making his major league debut in 2021. So something to keep an eye on. Anyway, we're almost out of time for this episode, so that brings me to Through Blue Jay Colored Glasses. So for my take this week, I'm sticking with the outfield, And I really feel good about this group. And again, for me, my top three of the four that we talked about are obviously George Springer, as well as Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. I think that group of three could really be something special for the Toronto Blue Jays. If you're on Twitter and if you're a Blue Jays fan, there's one Jays fan that you might be somewhat familiar with. He goes by the handle Blue Jays Dad. And about a month ago, he tweeted that, I wonder if it's possible that Springer, Hernandez, and Gurriel could be the most productive outfield that the Blue Jays have ever had in their history, even surpassing the very famous Lloyd Moseby, George Bell, and Jesse Barfield. Well, Jesse Barfield is on Twitter, and he saw that tweet, and he quoted the tweet and said, if they stay healthy, he thinks they absolutely can. So here's someone who knows baseball, obviously, and who seems to have a very high opinion of this group. I think the three of them are going to do some big things with the Jays. And yeah, it's going to be very exciting to watch for this season and for the next few seasons at least. And that's through Blue Jay Color Glasses for this week. So on that note, I think we're pretty much out of time. Thanks for joining me, and go Blue Jays. See you again next week when there'll be actual spring training game results and performances to talk about.